Welcome to Half Hour Call, the podcast where we talk about live theater, TV, film, basically anything entertainment in general. I am your host, Rich Kless, and welcome to this part two of our interview with Rebecca Kupka Overton. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the interview.
Really cool.
Yeah. Um, so with Cap 21 right now, do you have an idea of like what's the representation out there in terms of, touring and Broadway and off Broadway? Are they being represented really well?
Yes, I mean, like I said, there's the NYU CAP contingent.
Hmm.
So those are sort of like graduates from 2011 and
Right.
prior. And I don't know as much from the conservatory years, from like that, there was like a 3 year period. And then once Malloy took over, our first graduating class as Malloy CAP 21 was 2018. So it was not
Gotcha.
really that long ago, and then boom, COVID.
Right.
So for like a good year and a half, those students were out in the world with nothing to
Right.
be doing. Um, so in the past 3 years, I would say, those students are all starting to hit. And our recent graduates are, and I would also say that the quality of the student that we are attracting initially has really risen in
Right.
in recent years. So like now you mentioned Book of Mormon, we have two of our graduates who just booked the Book of Mormon tour. They've been out for like 6 months. Um, One of our seniors is one of the lead roles in the parade tour, the first national of
Okay.
parade. So he's taking, I actually think it's not even a leave of absence. I think they somehow managed to kind of call it even with like the last few credits that he needed. So I think
Right.
he's going to be able to graduate with this parade tour as sort of like a life experience, practicum, independent study type thing. Um, and Nisha Lewis, she was Dorothy in The Wiz.
Mhm.
That was just on Broadway. She graduated. Nichelle is a 2019. No, she's 2020. She graduated during COVID. And so they did a national search for the role of Dorothy. And that was all via video. So she
Right.
submitted videos with 3,000 other Dorothy hopefuls and ended up booking Dorothy on Broadway. And then just recently, she was Sarah in Ragtime at City Center. So, our students are doing really well. But beyond the obvious things, like I think what I like about Cap 21 is that we are a little bit of a niche program where we are not so singing, dancing, acting, singing, dancing, acting, singing, dancing, acting,
Right.
like so rote, like automaton, like some conservatory programs tend to be, like this conveyor belt of
Right.
like musical theater robots. Um, Not that we don't have that training, we do, but alongside that training, we sort of make space for, like I said, like independent studies and student works, and there's a directing elective, a playwriting elective, a stage management elective. So, and we also, because we have this college, Malloy
Right.
University associated, they can minor in other things. So a lot of them will minor in like creative writing or marketing or music, composition, songwriting, things like that. And so what I'm finding is that our students are taking a lot of kind of alternate paths. Like one of our also Alex was a 2018 graduate. No. I can't remember what year he was, but Alex Arlotta, he right after he graduated with a musical theater degree, he was accepted to Berklee College of Music for their musical theater writing and directing program. So he now has a master's in
Okay.
musical theater, writing and conducting. Or I'm not sure exactly what the title of the degree is, but he's writing his own stuff, and he's been doing a lot of like performances in New York City, and has his master's degree now. A lot of our students have really gotten involved in like not-for-profit work, and so I feel like we sort of encourage the artistry
Yeah.
of our students, whereas some programs I think are maybe a little bit more limited. Great training,
Right.
but the scope of what we're asking the students to do and what we're asking the students to kind of think about, like what we say to students in auditions, is like one of the things that I think sets Malloy Cap 21 apart is that we are asking students for all 4 years to do the work of figuring out who they want to be in the world, in the world of theater.
Right.
And what does that look like to you? Like, yes, singing, dancing, acting. Yes, maybe being on Broadway, maybe a big national tour. Like, that's the goal for most of them. But like beyond that, like how else do you want to contribute to the world as like a citizen of the arts, citizen of the world? And I feel like when students kind of do that work themselves, figuring out how they want to contribute, it's like building a house on like a
Yeah.
strong foundation as opposed to like a popsicle sticks that falls down when suddenly, you're 30, you're 35, you're 40 and your type is changing and you never really figured out what else to do except what they taught you to do at 20 years old. So it's like I just feel like our students are
Are you
hi,
back?
are you back? Yeah, that was I was like, hi, frozen, totally.
Yeah.
It's oh maybe it's me. It says your internet connection is unstable. Sitting right next to my thing. That's odd.
I'm unstable too, so it's
Yeah.
okay.
I'm like, it's not only the internet connection. It's
Right.
like
If
maybe
only.
it's because I'm sitting next to it. It's like
Right. If
my
only.
crazy energy.
Um, so quick question. So you talking about the doing other things rather than just singing, acting, dancing, and I think that's important to make sure that students have that opportunity. I'm just sitting here thinking, what quick question is, what's the average class size of?
Yeah, sure. So our incoming class, our kind of target number is 32.
Right.
That's what we want it to be. Administration often wants it to be more than that
Of
because,
course they do. They want. Yeah.
tuition-driven
Right.
school, they want more because we have more people who are interested in the program. So let's jam them on in. But it doesn't really work that way in a conservatory. So there's always that sort of like headbutting between admissions and the department, or rather enrollment management and the department, because the department is like, we can't administer a class of 60. It doesn't work that way,
Right. Right.
and then not to mention the personalities of little musical theater people.
Right.
Like they are, as I'm sure you know, they are a different population of
Absolutely.
students. Like they need more attention and guidance and support than your average
Right.
biology major,
Right.
just, and I'll leave it at that. You know what I mean? Theater people are a
Right.
lot.
And
And,
yeah,
I
and I think
mean,
that intensity of the smaller, the keeping it 30s for me personally, like even again, Duke is way smaller than that, but you can see the ability. I'm going to use her as an example. A graduate of Duke a few years ago, Danya Tamor, who directed, just won a Tony Award.
oh,
Oh,
is that Julie Taymor's
yes,
daughter?
niece.
Niece. Oh,
Um,
wow,
The
cool. Sounds
Outsider.
like a family.
She directed The
Oh,
Outsider.
she directed The
Yeah.
Outsiders?
And I do remember her, she directed, I think she was in a few things because it was like, oh, I need to get that experience. But from day one, it was like all she wanted to do was direct, 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 direct. And because the class sizes were so small, she got that opportunity from day
Yeah,
one, which was important. So obviously paid off.
absolutely. Oh my gosh, my youngest daughter, McKenna, she's 13. Obsessed. They went with their eighth grade class. The whole eighth grade of East Northport Middle School went because they read the book and they took
Right,
them all. They got $80 tickets. They got to meet, I think, the choreographer or somebody that they had a connection with backstage. And
right.
she was like
Yeah.
mind blown.
And I think that, just in general, the networking of people that you have available. I mean, I know, again, when I first started, we used to have a program at Duke called the Broadway Preview Series, where it was actually like Little Women, the musical, previewed at Duke before it went to Broadway. And the first show I worked on at Duke was Thousand Clowns with Tom Selleck.
Wow,
Um,
so it was like a launching point, like
and
an out of town.
this and one of the students who was the stage management intern, that was she was a senior at the time, so she became the stage management intern on that show. She later on, she was the original stage manager of Lion King on Broadway for years.
Wow.
She is actually one of the victims of COVID, in the sense of, we lost a lot of people who went, I'm not doing this anymore in this industry during COVID, and
Yeah.
she became a lawyer and is
Wow.
now like a judge or something like that.
Holy cow.
But she was, that was through that networking opportunity and getting to know those people. And I'm sure it's the same. You get to know the people who are working on steadily on different tours and Broadway and off Broadway and everywhere. And once you start to get to know all those people, it becomes easier to start
Without
making
question.
opportunities for
I mean,
yourself.
I think all industries have, a measure of who you know, but
Right.
theater is really,
It's
really is so much who you know and who you've worked with.
but it's also a small community. You and I just had this a couple months ago when I was working on Bull Durham, and you were like,
Oh my
"Hey,
gosh.
comment on that." And I was like, "Wait a minute."
Yes.
With Lauren
Yes.
Kennedy, I walked into rehearsal the next day, and I looked at Lauren. And I said, "How do you know my prom date?"
That is like absolutely hilarious. And I can't remember if I told you this before I left Facebook, but Lauren and my husband, David, dated briefly. Like they were dating like maybe I don't know, 6 months or a year before I met him. And then it was
Right.
a quick kind of thing. And then I met David down in North Carolina doing what used to be North Carolina Theater, which I think
Right.
is no longer, or at least has kind
It's
of,
it's morphed into something
morphed
different.
into something else. But at the time, they called it STAS, Summer Theater
Mhm.
Arts School. So it was for kids. It was like 7 to
Right.
17-year-olds or something. And he was the director, I was the choreographer, because I had done a show at NCT. Like I
Mhm.
had done Grease at
Right.
NCT, and they knew I enjoyed working with kids. They were like, "Hey, do you want to come down here and do STAS with our director?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. If I'm not doing something in New York, I'll come down." And
Yep.
sure enough, down I came, met him, and 3 kids later and 25 years of marriage, like I guess it was a good choice.
It was definitely a good choice. Well, let's talk about that for a second. One of my questions are your kids following in your footsteps in the arts, or are they? Mine did.
Mine did not. Well,
Okay.
let's say my 13-year-old is a dangling participle. We're not sure what she's going to do yet. But my oldest daughter, Riley, she is 23, and all of them did musical theater
Hmm.
in school, like in
Yeah.
like elementary school and middle school and high school. They always did the shows. My two older girls, Riley and Carlin, gravitated more toward dance.
Gotcha.
And my middle daughter, Carlin, was a competitive gymnast, so she had that showmanship and that stage
Hmm.
presence. I mean, she was really quite good, a very strong gymnast. But both of them, the older girls, have genetic scoliosis. And
Okay.
so they both had to have spinal fusion surgery when they were in their teens. So that
Mhm.
kind of ended Carlin's gymnastics hopes. And Riley, who had been really pursuing dance at that point, it didn't prevent her from dancing because she did dance. She went to Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania
Mhm.
and she majored in psychology and studio art, of all things. And she's an incredible artist, which she gets from David's side, not from me. And I can't even draw a stick figure. And but she participated in all of the dance concerts and the anything related to dance. That was like her outlet in college, but it was not something that she was ever really interested in pursuing professionally. Same thing with Carlin. Carlin is in South Carolina. She is an international business major, Spanish minor, and she's right now, as we speak, she is in Portugal studying abroad, and she just returned from two consecutive away weekends, travel
Oh,
weekends. She
okay.
went to Madrid for 4 days, and then she went to Interlaken, Switzerland for 4 days. So she's over there paragliding and sledding and clubbing and living her very best life, ostensibly taking a class every now and again,
Right.
which I think is the reason she's over there.
Right.
Um, and then I have my little McKenna, who, if I had to say, now I know I'm her mother, I'm going to sound like a total
Mhm.
sage mother. She's got it. She's got the spark, she's got the voice, she's got the presence, she's got the comedy. Um,
You've
whether she,
told anecdotes on social media about her, and I just want to hang out with that kid because everybody
she,
needs that energy in their life.
everybody needs a McKenna. Like, honestly, when I say McKenna for president, like, I mean it, because she is so deeply wise for her. Like, she came
Mhm.
out that way. She's like,
Right.
she's been here before, this little soul, you know? I
Right.
mean, she's just this, the connections that she makes. I mean, I think this is Jim Hoare's favorite is when
Hmm.
she was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, she said, "Oh God, I just sneezed so hard my soul flew out." Like, she was like
It's
she was in preschool when
right.
she said that.
Right. Right.
Like,
Like who thinks of that?
like
Like,
who makes those kinds of
right.
connections? I mean, she's a great kid. Right now, she's playing Nostradamus in Something Rotten. Last year, she was Miss Honey and Matilda at
Okay.
school, and then she was Fiona in Shrek. So she's always getting the leads. And but she says, and I quote, she said, Mom, I really do think that if I wanted to, I have the ability to make it on Broadway if I put my mind to it." And she said, "But I also think that the world needs my writing and my political science and my science skills more than they need another actress."
Oh, there you go.
And I
That's
was like,
again wise,
okay.
the wiseness of that
So
age.
we'll see. I mean, she's
Yeah.
13, but like right now, she's at rehearsal right now as we speak.
And again, it's something that happens again. Both of my sons, they went to Elon, which not for musical theater. They went for just music in general. They're both musicians.
Oh, that's awesome.
And Elon being one of those programs that's out there that's very well represented on
Oh my
Broadway for musical
gosh.
theater.
Like, Elon is a huge,
Um,
I don't want to say competitor because you're not really
right.
competing with schools,
No,
but Elon is one of those incredibly well respected. If you get into Elon, you go.
which is odd because I never knew that honestly before my
Yeah.
sons went there. I was just like, okay. And we went to, I remember going to the, tour around and the chairman of the department sitting, because Elon was a business school as far as I was concerned. It was,
Mm,
it's where you go to get your MBA. That's where everybody, they're very well known for that as
for
well.
that.
So I was just like, they don't have any arts things.
Right.
Come to find out, I was wrong. But, but one of the things I loved about him, because I have a business background, is the chairman of the theater department said, everybody's required to take two semesters of arts administration, no matter what their track is. He basically just said, you want to do art, learn how to pay for it.
Wow,
And
that's
I
that's
thought he said
key.
that, I was like, you're going here.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But
That's
my two sons followed in that track, and it's I got to tell you, it's been very odd sometimes to have this legacy kind of family thing going on. It really is weird. Like I had one time, my son texted me. He was working at the Alabama Theater in Myrtle Beach, and he texted me. He's like, "Dad, guess you just gave me a hug and said I did a great job." Otis Williams from the Temptations.
oh my
And I was like,
gosh.
"Yeah, I worked with Otis Williams back in 1988 when it was for a music fair." And I
It's
was
like
like,
out of body, like
when
out
the
of body
rest when the rest
experience.
of the Temptations were still alive. you know. But and
That's
then my other
awesome.
son Tyler, he was on the road for a while. He currently works at Algonquin Playhouse up in Maine.
In Maine,
Um,
gorgeous.
and he has said to me a couple times like, "Dad, this guy came in, we were doing this show, and this guy was doing Loaded because he was on tour for a while as well." And a guy just came up to me. He goes, "Do you know Rich Kless?" And I asked my father. "Oh, I worked with Rich back doing this." And I was like, "Oh, wow, that's kind of weird that you're getting to see people that I worked with 20 and 30 years ago is really kind of interesting take on it. I never expected that
Yeah.
to happen.
Right.
Being
Right.
in the same thing, like all of a sudden them coming up to me and go, "Yeah, there's some guy was talking about you. I was working with." And I was like, "Okay,
Okay.
what did I do?" Real quick, let's kind of walk away from Cat for a second because I am very curious about your and your husband's adventure of Long Island Shakespeare. The what is it? The
Yeah,
Long Island
Long
Classic
Island
Stage
Classics
Company.
Stage
Yeah.
Company. Yeah.
What is that all about?
Good question. So, back in, oh gosh, 2012, I think, I had just had McKenna,
Okay.
and I was like, I can't perform right now. I really, I had a baby at home again, and I was like, we gotta do something else. And interestingly, not to get, too far into the weeds, but David had taken a job down in North Carolina in
Mhm.
2010 that didn't work out, not the job itself, but
Mhm.
because of budget cuts. And at the same time, that was sort of like the housing recession. So we
Right.
weren't able to really sell our house up here on Long Island. We had only been in it for like 6, maybe 7 years, and it wasn't enough to make it worth
Right.
it to
Right.
to sell it. So he ended up coming back up from Raleigh and couldn't get a job in his field. And we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So that's how Long Island Classic Stage Company was born. The goal, which, as I'm sure you know, how challenging it is to get people to, hand over money to,
Yeah.
fund these things. So instead of it turning into the kind of repertory Shakespeare company for adults that we had hoped, it sort of morphed more into a summer theater program called Classic Kids, which was very successful. We did um, we ran, I think it was 7 consecutive summers before 2019, which was when one of my daughter's Carlin's surgery was. So we didn't run it, and
Mhm.
then COVID hit. And then it was darn near impossible to get it all back together again. And truthfully, our hearts weren't in it at that point. Like it
Right.
had kind of run its course, and we had we had a great time working with kind of, I think our youngest students were, we called it mini kids, so that was like 5 to 7 year olds, and I ran that. But actually the main program was for like eight to 16 year olds. Um, and the goal was sort of to impart life skills via Shakespeare.
Okay.
So, we were teaching them, like David had 3 rules, and one of them was saying yes and. But it's not just yes and the way you think of it in
Mhm.
theater. It's like who make your partner look good. That's another one of the rules. Who's your partner? How about your mom and dad when they say, you need to clean up your room, it's a disaster? Yes, mom. Yes, dad. Yes, and. What else can I do? I'll also take out the garbage and walk the dog for you.
Right.
So, we made it fun, and then of course at the end we would have like a little showcase where they would do, instead of a full Shakespeare, they would do Shakespeare scenes. And then we also interspersed it with some musical theater because that's my thing. And of course, the parents want to hear some songs and they want to see some
Right.
dancing. So it was like this sort of hybrid Shakespeare, the Greeks. Like we did some, we even did scenes from like Oedipus Rex and like,
Right.
some of the less racy stuff. But it was these kids kind of realizing that they can wrap their mouths around this language,
Right.
mostly the older kids, but even the younger kids at the end of every show, which was always 1 hour long, at the end, we finished, instead of having bows, each student, we would say their name, they would come forward and they would say a Shakespeare quote. So they would
Mhm.
have, every kid had a line. So even the ones who were like the shyest little peanuts or the teeniest little peanuts would have at least one line that their parents could,
Right.
video, and, that they could kind of be out there. And we taught them, you're hitting your mark, you're hitting that X, you're taking the stage, this is your moment.
Right.
And, the years later, the feedback that we have gotten from kind of kids who went through the Classic Kids program, they are like we still remember those rules. We still
Yeah.
remember that, like, taking the stage, and taking that moment, whether it's, in a meeting, or whether it's in a job interview, or whether it's for, an audition, or just kind of in a social setting, like
Right.
to be confident in yourself with what you are about to say, and that's kind of, that was our overall, what it morphed into, even though we had hoped that we would be able to create like a Shakespeare repertory company, which didn't ever really come to fruition.
Well, it's still important. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, I was speaking about Shakespeare with my last podcast, and talking about the fact that one of the things that makes me crazy is you get the people who say, "Oh, out of the box thinking," and you got to think out of it. And I go, "Yeah, but they need to know what's in the box." And I was
Yeah.
saying to him, Shakespeare is in the box in our field.
Yeah.
That is the box, the beginning of the box, and you have to know that to start. To go, and even musical theater, it's like I liken it. My wife is a dancer, so it's like it's ballet. If you don't have ballet, you can't do the other things. You can try, but you're going to be lost because you need the
Well, which is
base.
why when we started this conversation, I take ballet. I take
Right,
adult ballet out here on Long Island because I never really learned.
right,
And it was like I managed to somehow fake my way through,
right,
Broadway shows and national tours, but like I don't, I didn't know what I was doing. And eventually it caught up with me. And then it was like in my 30s and 40s that I was like, you know what? I want to learn how to do
right.
this. I
There's a
want to,
name for that.
yes, I want to know, like, I know what you're saying. I know how to make that step because I know what a
Right,
contretemps is, or I
right,
know what a, I know what a plie is. I know what a glissade, you know, I,
right,
I know what a grand jeté is. I know what it is, but I don't really know. I know how to mimic it.
right.
Same way that I knew how to mimic voices, but I didn't know what the technique behind it was. So yeah, that's like as Shakespeare is to performance.
Yeah. And again, I think that's so important to give the kids that base to grow off of. It just is something that I think we were taught fairly early, um, that we were taught to fake it till you make it a lot of times,
Absolutely.
which
And
is
that's still, I mean,
fine. It's valid, but
yes,
as I've gotten older, it's nice to be able to go, oh, like I said, there's a name for that, and
yes.
I knew that, I just didn't know what it was, you know.
Faking it till you make it only takes you so far, I think,
Right,
and there's absolutely, a space for that, but I think that when you start realizing that you're doing more faking than anything else,
right,
getting that education, whatever that is, whether it's self-education, whether it's reading some books, whether it's doing a little research on your own, whether it's just taking some classes, at the local studio, or whatever it is, to just kind of edify yourself. And it's like, I wish I could impart that wisdom to younger
right,
people, because younger people are like, I already know what I'm doing, and
right.
that's something that I think is really important.
Let me ask you one other thing in terms of the areas of your life. Talk to me about some of the voiceover work you've done. How did you get into that?
If I could do anything, if I could, like my perfect life, if I could make a living doing voiceover and nothing else, that is what I would do. Like, I love it more than I love being on stage.
Right.
So yeah, I kind of fell into it, and it's not like it's not like I've done a bazillion different things.
Hmm.
When I moved to Colorado, this was when David, my husband, got his PhD at CU Boulder. He had gotten his MFA in acting from UNC Greensboro,
Okay.
actually, and decided he really wanted to lean a little bit more towards teaching, and that was sort of like back at the transition time where there didn't used to really be PhDs for, like, if you had an MFA, that was considered a terminal degree. So if you
Right.
wanted to teach at the college level, just having a master's was fine. And it is still okay, but it has
Hmm.
gotten so competitive that if you have a PhD, like you'll
Absolutely.
you'll see, job descriptions, MFA required, PhD preferred, So he decided to go get his PhD, got accepted to CU Boulder, stunning school. So I moved out there with my new husband. I mean, we had been married for just over a year, and like 18 months, and I moved out there 6 months pregnant with Riley. So I'm like, what am I doing with my
Right.
life? So I was either like giving birth or,
Hmm.
breastfeeding a child. And so I was not really doing much performing while I was out there, but turns out there's a lot of like voiceover work and commercial work out in Denver. So I started going for like voiceover auditions, which I loved. I was like, this is really, really fun. And I booked some commercials out there, like some on-camera commercials as well. And then when I came back to New York, I I ended up in Jersey Boys as the one of the I was a vacation swing, so very cool position where they basically call you every time someone takes a vacation. So you're kind of like in for a week, out for 3 months, in
Right.
for 2 weeks, out for a month. So I got to kind of keep my feet in it. I
Right.
got to still be performing and on Broadway too, but I was also able to kind of be home with my kids most of the time instead of commuting 8 shows a week because that was
Right.
that was a lot,
Yeah.
from Long Island. And while I was in Jersey Boys, I started doing some voiceover work at a studio called Big Yellow Duck. A guy named Matt Padone still owned and operated. He's a Long Island guy from Huntington, and I had an agent. My agent was sending me out on voiceover stuff. And that was how I met Matt. And so I started doing voiceover stuff through Big Yellow Duck. And then I booked an animated series. At the time, it was called International Hairport, like HARE, like
Right.
rabbits. It was like two little rabbits, brothers, who ran this airport. And if you look it up on YouTube, there are like 5 episodes that you can find
Hmm.
in English with our voices because
Okay.
it ended up getting picked up in France.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they redubbed it
Every.
in French. So like the so much of what we did is not actually out there, but there are a few on YouTube that you can find. And I was like, oh my God, they're here. That's
Yeah.
me. And
I
it was so fun.
I actually listened to one today because I was curious about it myself, and I found one. So,
Well, you probably recognize my voice. I was Moppet. I was the
yep.
little deer. And then I played a whole bunch of other roles too, because that's the
Hmm.
way voiceover works. Like you
Right.
kind of get cast as like a main character and then you do like all
Once
sorts
you.
of other, like once you're into it. And that
Right.
we recorded 26 episodes and it was like my favorite thing to do. We recorded it over a period of about a year and
Right.
hoped that it would get picked up in the US, but it didn't.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to say thank you so much for talking with me today. This was a lot of fun to catch up with you, first of all, and
Absolutely. Oh my gosh,
and
thank you for asking
talk
me.
about this stuff. Um, I want to remind our listeners, if you enjoyed what you heard, please hit subscribe, and we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you, everybody, and keep the faith.